За та бүхний нэрийг доктортой хөгжлийн дөрвийн 7 дахь зорилтын хүрээнд бидний зүгээс цуврал лекцийг олон нийтэд зориулсан зохион байгуулж байгаа. За энэ удаагийн лекцийн агуулга маань гендер эрхтгч байдал, хүний эрхийн боловсрол, доктортой хөгжилгээд олон асуудлуудыг хамарсан айх хайцгүй ачаалтсан болонгүй чөлөөт үгээлж илтгэгч мөлжлөгтэй амьдрах нийгэм зохицлогтой холбож байгаа. Ялангуяа хүний айх хайцгүй хүчирхийллээс ангид байх суурь нөхцөл боломж олцоотой холбоотой агуулгыг хөндөж өгнө юм байна. Зочин багшийг үргэлжсэн. Тэгээд гендер эрхтгч байдал, хүний эрхийн боловсрол, сургалт, мөн доктортой хөгжлийн асуудлууд маань өөрөө хэрхэн хүүхэд хамгаалалттай холбоотой байв гэдгийг танилцуулж өгнө юм байна. Өнөөдрийн лекцийг зохион байгуулж байна. За тэгээд бүгдээрээ зочныхоо лекцийг сонсцгоё.
Hello everyone, my name is Gillermo Galarzа. I go by Gigi. I am the Vice President of Partnerships and Law Enforcement Trainings at the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Let me allow to please thank the Secretariat of National Committee for Human Rights for Mongolia for allowing us to discuss a very important topic. And it is a human rights topic. It is child sexual exploitation. What are the dangers? What is child sexual exploitation? And how we are, as a society, are trying to combat the problem and the issue. Because it is a global issue. And no country can do it alone. It requires a multi-sectoral approach, from law enforcement to policymakers, to NGOs, to criminal justice, and many others. And we will talk about these issues as we go through the presentation. So again, thank you so much for giving us the time. Please allow me to give you a little bit more background of my line of work and what I've been doing at the International Center. So as I said, my name is Gillermo Galarza, and I am the Vice President of Partnerships and Law Enforcement Trainings at the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I started my career back in 1996 at our sister organization, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And in there, I worked several roles, from working with parents, helping them one-on-one, finding missing children, to working on online child sexual exploitation, and then eventually working on international child abduction. I started at the International Center back in 2000. Now, I will talk a little bit more about the difference of both of the organizations, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There are two different organizations. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, commonly known as NECMEC, is a U.S. national non-profit organization that was created in 1982. The organization's mandate is to work with law enforcement and to work with parents to reunite children. Now, in 1998, that charter got expanded to work and assist law enforcement on online child sexual exploitation. As we know, back in the mid-90s, the internet was just growing, not just commercially, but also for communications, for transportation, and many other things that we have today. But also that grew the problems and the challenges of online child sexual exploitation. Predators would go online and try to groom children, and we will talk about grooming in just a little bit. They will utilize the internet to hide themselves and to try to lure children to run away from home, or to engage in sexual acts, and so on. So with the growth of the internet and the dangers of the internet, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children decided to create a a cyber tip line so they can receive all the cyber tip reports, not only from the parents, but also from the industry. When I say industry, it's the tech industry, social media companies, and so on. As you may know and may be aware, industry plays a critical role in the fight of online child sexual exploitation. So in 1998, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created the Cyber Tip Line Report to receive reports of online child sexual exploitation, commonly known as child sexual exploitation material or child sexual abuse material. In about 2000, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, created an international body, an entity called the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. That's where I work now. And as the years came up, we decided to separate both of the organizations, and mainly because of the line of work. The National Center, NCMEC, is a non-governmental organization that is really focused in proactive assisting law enforcement. It's more operational. The International Center at work now, ICMEC, is more of a capacity building, international capacity building, working with other countries to really build their infrastructure, their national capacity, provide international trainings, and much more. And this is why we're here, because we're going to talk about an important issue that I think in Mongolia we need to start discussing this issue. We've done about 2 trainings in the past 15 years in Mongolia, training the Mongolian National Police, working with the national prosecutors, and working with other regional entities like the Asia Foundation, UNICEF, and others. Now, that's kind of where we are right now. I want to talk about the global phenomenon of online child sexual exploitation and what is the national capacity approach that we're looking at. So if you could bear with me, I'm going to pull up my presentation right now. And here you should be able to see the actual presentation. So the topic for today is model national response. How do we tackle online child sexual exploitation? And basically, how do we tackle it? And the way we see this is by looking at national capacity or capacity building. When we're looking at addressing online child sexual exploitation, there are many factors that are involved. We basically have to look at national strategy plans. Some countries like Mongolia, you have a national strategy plan to combat online child sexual exploitation, whether it's improving legislation, whether it's to implementing legislation, whether it's looking at other national frameworks to address online child sexual exploitations. So there are many factors that are involved, not just on the policy, legislation, regulation, but also how we can work together with law enforcement to make sure that they're trained, work with prosecutors to understand how to criminalize and prosecute online child sexual exploitation, and many other items that should be highlighted in a national strategy plan. Most countries do have national strategy plans. That is something that I would encourage you to look at and identify what is your national strategy plan from 2024 to 2030 or 2029. Some countries have a 2-year plan or a 3-year plan. And just to look at the different areas that we're going to talk about in this session to ensure that Mongolia and the entities are equipped with the issues and the topics that they need to address for the next 2-3 years. We look at national protection frameworks as well. And within that, we have to ensure that there's training for criminal justice, first responders, prosecutors, but there's also other type of trainings. What is the medical field doing to address online child sexual exploitation? What are the schools doing to look at proper training for educators. As we know, educators spend most of the time with children. So are they properly trained to identify the signs of online child sexual exploitations? Are the schools properly adequate with the protocols so they can screen new teachers so we can avoid exploitation at school? So there are all these different issues that we need to take into account when we are talking about trainings and equipping entities with the proper tools. Are NGOs equipped with trainings? Because as we know, this is not just a law enforcement issue. This is not just a government issue, but also we require the support of the NGOs. Non-governmental organizations play a critical role in the fight of online child sexual exploitation. Now, we also have to take a look at technology. What are some of the companies doing to help the Mongolian government and law enforcement to innovate, to use the latest technologies, at least advanced technologies, so they can proactively investigate online child sexual exploitation? Unfortunately, with this type of crime, criminals have an advance to it. And this is why a lot of times in a lot of governments, we are not equipped with the latest technologies so law enforcement can investigate online child sexual exploitation. And this gives an advance to criminals because they are equipped with those technologies. They do have the resources to get the latest technologies. So this is something that we have to take into account as we're looking at national strategy plans. So we have to look at budgets to ensure that the investigative entity has the right tools and the technology so they can investigate online child sexual exploitation. Another point that I want to touch upon, public awareness campaigns. And this is something that I will figure out and I will think this is your lowest hanging fruit, because it is very important that the public is aware of what is online child sexual exploitation. How do we talk to children? How are parents aware of what the problem is? So it's a very important initiative that countries should develop a national public awareness campaign. Now, corporate social responsibility, I touch upon a little bit. It is important that companies in Mongolia or that are doing business in Mongolia develop a corporate social responsibility, because again, as I said, we can't do it alone. We are NGOs. We have to work together with companies. We have to work together with other NGOs, and we have to work together with governments to develop a strategy plan to combat online child sexual exploitation. The last point, as we're talking about capacity building, research and data collection, it is very important that an entity in Mongolia develops a research component to identify the prevalence and how big the problem of online child sexual exploitation in Mongolia is. Also, there needs to be an agency or a unit within an agency that collects all this data. How many reports are coming in? What kind of reports are coming in? Who has filed a report? What has happened with those reports? To have that data collection is important, so policymakers understand that it's an issue in the country or in Mongolia. It is not just an issue in your nearby country or in another continent. It's a global issue, and we must first understand how big the problem and the prevalence is in Mongolia, so we can start making the right decisions to address capacity building. Now, let me give you what is the current global situation of online child sexual exploitation. As I mentioned, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has a cyber tip line. And within the cyber tip line, they give reports mainly from industry. But if you can see, 21 million reports of suspected online child sexual exploitation were reported to NECMEC in 2020. That number in 2022, 2 years later, escalated to 32 million reports, and this is globally. I will talk a little bit about the reports that were sent to Mongolia as well. But this gives you the global problem of online child sexual exploitation. We're just talking the cyber tip reports. We're not talking about the reports that go into the national police or the hotlines or any other reports. These are just the reports that are coming into the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Now you will say, why there are so many reports? Again, we will talk a little bit further. Now, online enticement has increased about 97.5% in just 1 year. That means enticements. Children are playing video games. Children are online all the time. What happens is that online predators are trying to lure children, are trying to entice children to commit sexual acts, to commit self-generated online child sexual exploitation. So this generates a problem. As you can see, the increase has going up and it will continue to grow as technology is available everywhere. Now that many countries are sort of moving from the COVID era to actually going to school, this is something that we also need to be aware, because during the COVID year, that presented a problem. It presented the problem that children were at home all the time. They were going to school at home, they were connected at home, they were playing video games, but also the sex offenders. They were working from home, they were spending most of the time in their computers. So of course, that online enticement increased dramatically during COVID. But now again, that we're sort of hopefully passing that COVID area, we need to be aware that the children are now going to be walking to school, they're going to be in public places, they're going to be spending more time outside. So we have to be aware that there might be some issues of enticement publicly there. Children now are being exposed to a lot of issues online, not just the grooming, not just enticement, but also hate, drugs, exposure to many other issues that we need to be aware. They have exposure to child sexual exploitation material, but also adult pornography. Of course, we talked about the issue of grooming. Children are being enticed. And of course, the cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is an issue that is currently growing. And I think it's a new pandemic because now children are committing suicide. Children are being enticed by other groups outside the United States or within the United States. That's where my organization resides. And they're being enticed to do many other things. And they can't take it. They have no one to talk to. So unfortunately, they are committing suicide. And this is what as you will see in this slide, children are taking their lives because parents are not aware of the stress that they're being faced. Children are being blackmailed to do sexual acts or to send money to the perpetrator. Often they have spent all their savings, they don't have the resources, and they're afraid to talk to their parents. But they're also afraid that if their picture gets out there because the perpetrator threatened them, their lives are going to be over. So a lot of the children are taking their lives. And it is where I say it's very important that we need to develop prevention, education, and awareness campaign. There are resources for parents out there. There are resources for children out there. They're not alone. And this is the message that we need to make sure that children understand that if they've been sextorted, there are ways that they can report this. And there are resources that they have available at their fingertips. So again, this is an issue of awareness, prevention, and education. Now, I talked a little bit about the cyber tip reports and the network cyber tip reports. And I also want to talk about another phenomenon that's happening globally. This map that you see is the map of the United States. And you will see a individual dot. They're colored orange, some of them are purple, some of them are light blue. That was just the map of the United States. And I scroll here and we see the continent of Africa and now going to Europe. and you will see the same dots. Again, we see one dot here, and expands to other dots. We're right now in the Middle East. We're now moving to Europe. We're hovering over Italy and so on. You will see it basically looks like a Christmas tree. And as I click into it, it gives me basic information. Some of them gives me how to get there. Some of them gives me other type of information, other indicators. What I'm showing you here is what we're calling peer-to-peer networks. This is a network that is composed of multiple computers that are connected. They're connected via a server. So just to give you an example, if my name is Guillermo and I am looking for pirated music, or I'm looking for a pirated movie, or pirated software, anything illegal, I'm gonna go into peer-to-peer network, and I'm gonna connect to another computer via an index server. This server could be centralized or decentralized. It could be anywhere in the world. And I'm gonna query this server, and I'm gonna ask this server, hello server, I am looking for the latest movie. Say for example, Superman. I am looking for the latest Superman movie that came out yesterday. So on these peer-to-peer networks, the server is going to go out into the specific network that has millions of users. And it's going to look and it's going to query. Guillermo is looking for the latest Superman or Batman movie. Who has that copy? And the server is going to go out and look all over the world, all over the networks. There are multiple networks out there. One computer, one peer may say, I have that specific movie, or I have portions of that movie. Then they're going to send the file back, and then eventually I'm going to have the file. Now, this is using peer-to-peer networks. As I said, there are many networks out there, eDonkey, eMule, Aries, etc., etc. What I am showing you in the map is that child sex offenders are using peer-to-peer networks to trade known images, known videos of child sexual abuse material. We're not talking about the movie components. We're not talking about the pirated software. We're talking about known images of child sexual abuse material. So if you will see here in this part of this line, all of these dots, the orange dot, the yellow dot, the blue dot, those are known individuals, known IP addresses trading what we know is child sexual abuse material. Without getting too much in the technology component, this gives us an understanding of who's trading child sexual abuse material, which in the United States is illegal. Trading, dissemination, distribution, possession is a crime. These individuals are trading known images of child sexual abuse material on peer-to-peer networks. Again, this is just to give you a basic understanding of globally what the problem is on child sexual abuse material. Another discussion, absolutely, I can talk about the numbers in Mongolia. If I can see here, no, I can talk about the numbers in Mongolia, but you can get an understanding. And the maps actually show a little bit of Mongolia, but not enough. I would have to go into the actual system and where in Mongolia. But there are cases in Mongolia, believe it or not. As I said, we have done trainings in Mongolia specifically on this component of peer-to-peer networks. But again, what I'm trying to highlight here is that it is a global problem, and it's a global issue, and we have to collectively work together. Now, with all these issues, cyber tips, peer-to-peer networks. Never lose the fact that these are violent crimes involving real children. That's pretty much it. This is not images of just cases. Every case involves a real child. These children are re-victimized every time that image or abuse is distributed. Now, stop for a second. And I just said, these are violent crimes involve real children. This is what I would normally say prior to 2022. And hear me for a minute why. These violent crimes are now real or AI generated. And this is going to be my new statement moving forward. Because with the rise of artificial intelligence in the last year, really, a lot of these images may be now generated by artificial intelligence. And now this is possessing a new challenge in the fight of online child sexual exploitation. Again, prior to 22, this would be a factual statement. These are violent crimes involving real children. Now, with 2024, I would actually change this statement to say these are violent crimes involving real or artificial generated images. Now, here's where we have to really look at the law, because in some countries, real or simulated images like artificial intelligence are criminalized. And this is the caveat where you, as part of your national plan, will have to really look at the components of technology such as AI. As I said, depicting the abuse of a child, either real or simulated, that's something that's going to be in the discussions in the next year. Because you would ask me if someone is looking for a young child, either artificial intelligence or not, that should be criminalized, because eventually looking at images, looking at material is fueling the need to engage in real sexual abuse with a child. And that is actually factually known. So anyway, this is something that we are going to have to look at as a community, as something that you have to look also as regulators and looking at policy, because this is going to be very interesting conversation as we move in 2024. Something that we also have to look at is terminology. Terminology is very important. Back in 5 years ago, we still call it child pornography, kiddie porn, Lolita. Let's call it what it is. It is child sexual abuse material or child sexual exploitation material. It is not child pornography. Pornography is pornography. Child pornography, this is not child pornography. These are the worst crimes against children. This is child sexual abuse material. We are now looking at different ways of looking at terminology, and even if we look at the evolution of the term, whereas before we used to call it child prostitution, children are forced to be prostituted, either because they were trafficked or abused. This is now called commercial sexual exploitation of children. If we look at the different term, sex tourism, this is called commercial sexual exploitation in the travel or tourism industry. The other term is child pornography in the technology media. It is basically child sexual abuse material. There's no way around it. But we're looking at different terms to understand that the terminology is an issue that we have to address. Now, did you pay attention? What is child sexual abuse material? What is child sexual exploitation material? I'm not going to answer those. Hopefully, once we air this video, we can talk a little bit more about it, because I think I will be online answering some of the questions. But as I said, it is very important to have this terminology clear. Now, in some of the countries that don't have or possess legislation, we use the UN protocol of the Convention of the Convention Rights of the Children, which basically defines child sexual abuse as the sale of children by any means. Child prostitution means the use of children in sexual activities for their reunification or consideration of the following. Child pornography means any representation by whatsoever children engage in real or simulated explicit sexual activities, or the representation of sexual parts of a child primarily for sexual purposes. My first argument would be it is not child pornography, and this is something that we actually still have to talk about. It is child sexual abuse material. But we're talking about where countries don't have any laws whatsoever, we have to use the UN protocol too. Now, moving from legislation, even if we think about the evolution of memory storage, think about the 1950s, 1960s, they were using punch cards. That in the 80s, early 90s, that got moved to floppy disks. Early 90s, mid 90s, we were using the CDs, CD-ROMs. Then eventually into the late 90s, again, late 20s, we're still using the thumb drives till the day. But again, we now are facing with cloud storage. What we're seeing this, again, we're seeing a tremendous amount of data being put into a floppy drive, into the cloud. And this, again, is generating a challenge, because now the data has been held in the cloud. And when we were looking at online child sexual exploitation, the data could be anywhere in the world. The suspect can be anywhere in the world, and the child can be anywhere in the world. Again, this is something that we have to really look at as we're investigating this type of information and this type of crime. The data that we're looking at is tremendous data. The technology has developed tools so we can comb through that data to look at child sexual exploitation material. Again, just so you can imagine, 1 gig of data, just 1 gigabyte. A thumb drive can have up to 25 gigs of data. And again, it represents in megabytes, then 24 megabytes, 2 gigs of data, 3 gigs of data, 5 gigs of data. Now we're looking at terabytes, gigabytes. I mean, the amount of information is just growing, and it's going to continue to grow. Again, going back to 1955, this is just 5 megabytes of data. It's not even a gig. I mean, it's not even a gigabyte. That's just 5 megabytes. Imagine, again, it puts it into perspective, 1 gigabyte. 1 terabyte can fill a whole gymnasium with just punch cards. I want to show you this this preview of a documentary that was that came up in 2022. But again, it's a documentary to give you a better understanding of the global problem, and it is Children in the Pictures. I hope you can hear it. It's just about 2 minutes long, but again, it gives you the understanding of what is the global problem. Once you watch this, again, this is just a quick preview where I would highlight I would highly encourage you to download the full video because it is something that that will impact you as well.
So any requests at all for me to do anything? Okay, is it over now? Anyway, someone liked it. Thank you for the like, whoever liked it.
People cannot grasp what is going on. The case of girl one. We're watching a little girl grow up.
It's really horrific, yes.
The abuser certainly seems to want to shock. These videos being distributed across the world. It's just a wave that hits you every single day that you come in. The task of service. We are that thin blue line.
They're going to help regardless of where they're at in the world.
We uncovered a criminal enterprise, a hierarchical structure focused on the sexual exploitation of children. There was a car,
The bedspread.
crime scene, one of the couch, the clock is ticking.
We saved the little girl.
Opened the Pandora's box.
This was a case into a sea of other cases. The sheer amount of content has soared.
And all it did was take us to another haystack full of abused. It's brutal.
The rapists in Asia, New Zealand,
There's things that will never leave you. Ever.
we just can't leave them. Any weapon, any tool that is available, I'm gonna use it.
This is a village issue, a global village issue. When somebody asks you to bring your skills to the table because children are being abused, there is no such thing as no. On my world.
As I said, it is a global issue. We're trying to work together with a global. Sorry about that. So yeah, it's a global issue as a short video said, but anyway, I think I would highly recommend for you to look at the full video. I think that you can download it online. Now, let's take a look at the offenders because it's an issue, the offenders. Who are they? This is your typical wall of shame. And I'm going to ask a question. What do you see in this picture? Think about a moment. I'm not going to answer this question. I'm going to answer it while we have the discussion. I think it's going to be in February. But think about this and let me know. I would love to hear what you don't see in this picture. Now I'm going to move on. I'm not going to give you the answer. Most of the child abuse occurs at home. It occurs by someone in authority, someone that has access to the children and so on. A lot of times, yes, it's the parents, it's the father, it's the uncle, it's the stepbrother, it's the brother, someone in authority, the coach, the nanny, etc. You will see here the relationship between the offenders and the children, and you will see 25%. It could be a neighbor, a family friend. 22% is a parent or a guardian. You could see here other relative, babysitter, guardian partner, about 3%, online enticement, self-production, human trafficking, and unknown to the child. These child sex offenders will do anything to hide their identities. As I said, the great thing about the internet, it gives us a sense of communicating the world, but also it gave child sex offenders an anonymity, a channel so they can exchange the worst of the worst images. Of course, they are going to do everything in their power to hide their identity. A lot of times these offenders are someone that is close to the children, as I said. They could be a rabbi, a religious leader, someone that the community trusts. And if they get caught, they will all be overcome with shame. They will face scrutiny by their friends, their neighbors, their workers, members of the community. If they get caught, their reputations will be destroyed. Not only the children will suffer, but also the suspect family. Often a lot of these suspects are well educated. They have ties with the family, the community. They have their own parents themselves. So they will do anything in their power to hide their identity. Now, to understand the offenders, every time we talk about child sexual exploitation, we think it's a boogeyman, someone in dark shadows of the internet looking for children. But no, actually not. As I said, most of the time these are someone that everyone knows. Now, to get a better understanding as to why child sex offenders abuse, we took one of our instructors did a survey and did a lot of interviews in the prison systems to get a better understanding as to why they abuse. And this individual did a lot of interviews with the inmates, again, to get a better understanding as to why they abuse. Often we think, oh, well, they were abused when they were kids, so now they're going to abuse again. We call it the vampire effect. Once they be beaten, they're going to bite again. It could be an answer, but a lot of them are situational. A lot of them, they're someone in authority, as I said, that is abusing because it fulfills their needs. But really, to get a better understanding as to why they abuse, some of them are, and most of them are attracted to prepubescent children. In the study that was conducted, 83% of the interviewees, and I think there were about 250 people that they interviewed, had images of children 6 to 12 years old. 39% had images of children 3 to 5 years old. 19% had images of the infant and toddlers over the age of 3. 92% had images of minor genitalia showing sexual explicit activity. 80% had images showing penetration of a child. 21% had child exploitation material depicting violence such as rape, bondage, or torture. And 40% were dual sex offenders. That means they were arrested once and they were put back in prison. What these findings are showing me is that the children are getting younger and younger and younger, but also the crimes, they're being more gruesome, more sexual explicit of the actual abuse. So we're talking about individuals with a set of mind, trying to reach out to prepubescent children, but also the sexual explicit. We're not talking about soft touch, we're talking about actual abuse, an actual heinous crime against the children. So these are some of the individuals that we're talking about. Why do they abuse? Well, between child sex offenders, they arouse, they gratify themselves, they validate and justify their behavior. They understand that international law enforcement ability to respond to transnational crime is minimal. Between themselves, they establish good proof of intention. They know that they can trade one image and you can get another image. Unfortunately, they trade images like if they were Facebook cards. Between themselves, they establish trust. They know it's very hard to detect this type of crime. And also, many nations don't have the resources, they don't have the laws, or they don't have the enforcement. As I said, at the National Center, they have the cyber deployment. You will see who reports, industry reports. You will see here that some of the companies report, and they have to report by law. In the United States, companies have to report by law or they get fined. And you will see a list of some of the companies that actually report to the National Center. And you will see that's why the numbers, the 32 million reports, are significantly large, because all of these companies are reporting to the National Center. Now, according to the US Code 18 US 22585, there's the reporting requirements by providers. They have to report to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. In turn, the National Center gives them a report that they have fully enacted upon the legislation, and then they get a receipt indicating that they actually have submitted a report. Why is mandatory reporting important? Because again, the ISP shall report. They should not seek out information, but if they find anything within the server, they should report it to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. As you can see here in this chart, you will see that, again, in 2019, there were 60 million files. There was an increase of 28 from 2019 to 2020. But again, from 2021 to 2022, look at the vast amount of reports that have come. 99% of the reports do come from the companies. 90% are outside the United States. And this is why it's very important to build a capacity, because these reports are going to Mongolia. We need to ensure that Mongolian law enforcement is equipped with the tools necessary so they can investigate online child sexual exploitation, especially the cyber tip reports. In a given week, just to give you an example, the reports are coming. Again, you'll see the terminology, and we're actually looking to changing that. We haven't changed it because the law in the United States still refers to it as child pornography. In countries where they're looking at child legislation, child protection legislation, again, they should look at child sexual exploitation material. Worldwide, these are just some of the reports that have come in the last year. Again, United States, Malaysia, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. You'll see the list down. The highest number of reports that have come in. Mongolia. In 2023, Mongolia received 25,716 reports. Those reports should be going either to the National Police or Interpol. I don't have an answer. I don't know where they're going right now. But this is something that you should inquire. What's happening with these reports? I believe on our last training, they're still going out to the National Police, but I'm not sure about that. With all these issues, how do we protect children from online child sexual exploitation? How do we prevent victimization? But how do we prevent the use of technology by child sexual predators with the intention of abusing children? These are just some of the questions that we asked ourselves back in 2000. And again, there is one simple answer. That is prevention, awareness, and education at all levels. But I think together we can make the world safer for children. Again, by building national capacity building. Let's look at legislation and implementation. Let's develop capacity by training prosecutors, judges, and other expertise. Let's raise awareness by creating prevention and education programs. And the last one, this is something that often we need to continue to see. Always think positive. Always we get bogged down by the lack of this, not enough of this. But on the other side, let's think about what we have. What can we work with? Let's again look at legislation. In 2006, ICMEC launched their first model legislation and global review. The purpose of it was to look at national legislation. Is there legislation specific to child sexual abuse material? Is child sexual abuse material defined? Are technology facilitated offenses criminalized? Is simple possession criminalized? And are ISPs mandated to report any content whatsoever to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children? Now, before I move into this slide, In 2006, we looked at 196 countries, again, just to see where they are in terms of legislation. In that year, there were only 5 countries out of 196 countries that filled the 4 criteria. Yes, there was a need to improve legislation globally. There was a need to improve awareness, and moving now about 20 years since the first, actually 18 years since the first report was launched, there are many countries that are fulfilling their criteria. If I can look at this, even Mongolia, look at Mongolia. You do have legislation specific to child sexual exploitation material. There's common definition. There's technology offenses criminalized. Possession, of course, is criminalized. The only one that I would highly encourage, and many countries don't check on this box, is the mandatory reporting. We need to get more of the ICPs to report, either regulated or self-regulated, to a national entity. That's why you will see a lot of reports coming to the National Senate, because ISPs are required to report any content to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. But that's something that I believe it's in the works, and I believe that's something that Mongolia could take on to regulate the ISPs to make sure that they report content, any content whatsoever, to a national entity. I think there's much more that we can do together. As I said, there are still countries out there that don't criminalize child sexual exploitation, and we need to continue to work with the policymakers. Now, having said this, you can have legislation, but how do we implement? Well, first of all, we have to look at international conventions. I'm sorry, bullet number 2 is referring to Fiji. That was another presentation that I should see it now. But we're really looking at the overview of Mongolia's efforts to combat online child sexual exploitation, and also look at the importance, really working with policymakers to really highlight the importance of changing legislation. So again, how do we look at this? Again, looking at the 2 different prongs. There's a preventive element and there's a protective element. We're already talking about the preventive element. Frameworks, trainings, social responsibility, and data collection. Now, if we want to enhance that, there's a protective element. Continue to enhance your legislation. Continue to formalize legal process, including arrests, convictions, prosecutions, and so on. You have to develop services for the victims, but also services for the perpetrators. And also develop a monitoring and reporting mechanism. I believe Mongolia is working or was working on developing a national hotline so they can report cases of online child sexual exploitation. If we look at the criteria again, going back to the legislation, the first edition in 2006, there were about 95 countries that did not criminalize specifically addressing child sexual exploitation material. If we move now to 2023, only 10 countries do not address child sexual exploitation material, which is a significant moment. 138 countries have sufficient legislation. 27 countries meet all the criteria except 5. And 111 countries meet 4 out of 5 criteria. That's a significant change. I think globally we're making a tremendous strive. However, there's always more to be done. I think it's important that we look at developing specialized units to combat online child sexual exploitation. And why is this very important? With all of these reports, we have to develop specialization. There is a trafficking unit. There's a unit to address theft, auto theft, terrorism. But when it comes to online child sexual exploitation, there's not enough specialized units. And this is something that we can work together. Interpol just passed a resolution encouraging member countries to create specialized units and to connect to the Interpol child sexual exploitation database. There's always trainings, and we will continue to do trainings. If there's an interest to do a training in Mongolia, and this is something that we can partner up with, absolutely we can. Undercover investigations, peer-to-peer. These are all the different trainings that we have available at your disposals if there's an interest to do a training in Mongolia. We have also e-learning on demand. If Mongolia is interested in taking a few hours e-learning on demand, we can actually send those, and those are for free as well. We also are looking at developing gap assessments. One of the gaps, and I'm finishing up the presentation here, one of the gaps that we saw every time we go to a country, whether we do a training, whether we do a legislation review, is that we did not have an assessment. We did not understand where the gaps were. And now, since about 2000, we started working with countries to develop a gap assessment. This is something we can work with Mongolia. Before we do anything further, prepare a strategic document, a framework based on reviews, evaluation, and analysis to identify where the gaps are, where the strengths are, and where can we work together on building a strategic plan that will allow ICMIC and the government carry out the construction of a national response model based on the findings on the gap assessment. We use the We Protect Global Alliance model national response that touches on policy, governance, criminal justice, the victims, and society. And we developed this gap assessment called the MRC, Multi-Sectoral Response and Capacity Assessment. Again, you will see here that identify the gaps in the national response in the prevention, investigation, and assistance to the victim. It identifies priorities for actors to fill in the gaps. And we work together with the Mongolian government, with the law enforcement in Mongolia to identify these gaps. And again, we will present the gaps at the end of 4 months to a national committee to ensure that if we're going to focus on a 2-year plan, this is your short, your medium, and your long-term plan. Again, focusing on the prevention, investigation, and assistance to the victim. And it is a tool designed to identify the gaps in the national legislation. Again, these are just some of the areas that touches upon, again, victim societies, industry, media, capacity, and governance. And the way we do that, basically, we do this in doing a lot of the interviews with public employees and social actors as well. We have access to public information such as database, documentations, and so on. We do a document review to look at legislation, agreements, and research. And we observe, we see the one-on-one with the public actors to look at what is actually involved and what are actually the gaps. Raise awareness, encourage responsiveness among industry partners, inform on capacity building, assist with the development, and support in advocacy. Lastly, I want to show this video. It's a prevention and awareness video that was created. But again, as we're looking at the lowest hanging fruit, let's look at prevention and awareness. I think this is really important. This was a video that was created to develop public awareness in the United States. But it's a typical video of a grooming, sextortion, and enticement. Please take a look.
Yes, still thinking about you. I know you've been waiting for this for a while. I wanted to give you something special. Who are you?
Why are you doing this? Again, for the purpose of this, that was just a prevention and education video. But again, it gives you the case, the typical case of a child sex offender trying to groom children. As I'm wrapping my presentation, I really again wanna thank the Secretariat of National Committee for Human Rights in Mongolia for the interest in bringing us to discuss a very important topic that I believe not affects countries but affects globally. I think at the end of the day, it requires partnerships because we cannot ever do this alone. We require the support of law enforcement, other organizations, regional partners. And it's very important that we talk about this because much more can be done. We need to connect on a wider ecosystem with hotlines, portals, NGOs. We need to continue to develop trainings and increase the public confidence through awareness, partnerships, and trainings. I believe we can make the world safer for children. And it's a responsibility as a society, but as adults and as parents. It is important that we address this issue because I would not want my children to be a victim of one child sexual exploitation. With that said, again, I want to thank the Society, the Secretariat of National Committee of Human Rights. I want to thank all the interested parties that were taking their time out of their busy days to spend an hour or so with me talking about this important issue. You have my name, you have our website there for further information. And if you need any information, please go on our site online and you should be able to find my contact information. Again, thank you very much for giving me the time. Mongolia is a beautiful country. I've gone to Ulaanbaatar 2 times in January, which has been very, very, very cold. And you do have a beautiful culture, but also with that, your beautiful children should be protected from online predators. And really, by means, any children in the world. Thank you so much for your time and stay safe. Happy Lunar New Year. And hopefully we can engage in further discussions. Thank you so much. And this will conclude the presentation.
And then. За одоо зөвхөн буцаад яачлаа. За одоо дуу нэгтсэн байна. Hello, good morning. Can you hear me? Test. I can't hear anything on that other end, but I hope you can hear me. Where is it? Okay, if you can hear me, I'm just here. I mean, I hope the presentation was well. I am here to address any questions that you may or may not have. I think at the end of the day, as I said, it's all about collaboration and information sharing. This is an issue that has been going for a very long time and it will continue to grow as technology increases. But again, I want to thank the organizers for really talking about this issue, because child exploitation is an issue that no one really wants to talk about because it's a taboo issue. But it happens more than ever now, especially with the rise in technology, devices, and an international movement. I think individuals are have the tools and the technology to be able to communicate one another, and with that also opens another area for child sex offenders, as I said, to trade images and videos of the worst of the worst. So I am here to answer any questions you may have or any other concerns. I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you. And of course, if you don't have any questions, what you may have our organization, the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or the website, which is icmec.org. And in there you can obtain helpful information on prevention, education, and learn a little bit more about some of the programs that we have available to offer to you. I see that ECPACT is in the call, and we do work with ECPACT in several parts of the world. We work with ECPACT International as well. One of the initiatives that we're really working with ECPACT is on the issue of terminology and the terminology guidelines, the Luxembourg guidelines, which I mentioned is really important. It's really important to talk about what it is and what is not. And we are revising the latest edition of the Luxembourg guidelines together with ECPACT. So I'm glad that I see ECPACT here on the call. Thank you for joining the call. And if there's any interest of doing something in Mongolia, by all means, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. In the past, we have done some work in Mongolia, specifically with UNICEF and with the National Police. We have been able to train law enforcement officers and prosecutors on the issue of child sexual exploitation. So happy to entertain any other possible projects or initiatives that you may have. Thank you. Over to you, Nomin, to see if, how do you want to take it from there? Or if there's any more questions, as I said, I'll be happy to answer them here on the call, or of course, you have my email address as well, which again is ggalarza1101@gmail.org, or you have our email address, which is icmec.org. Okay, I see that there's one question here. And I'm going to type my email address. And I'm also going to type the website for the organization. That's a very good question. The person that asked the question, there was a question that it read, I observed that there was no woman on the wall of shame. And can I elaborate on that? Most of these crimes are committed by males, and that's the reality. About 99.999, they're male sex offenders. There has been a lot of studies on the prevalence of child sexual exploitation, and it is a very male-driven crime. Having said that, there has been a lot of cases where there has been a woman-assisted offense or a crime against a child. Typically, the offenders, the male offenders, will try to lure single females, divorced females, young females, with the purpose of abusing their children or someone young within their family. But most of the crime is going to be committed by a male sex offenders. As I said, I think in the 27 years that I've been addressing this specific issue, there has been maybe 1 or 2 cases where there has been a female child sex offending case, and that was mainly because curiosity drugs. But like I said, it is impactful to see, yes, just male sex offenders. Just to reiterate again, there has been cases where there has been an assisted by a female, but it's been driven by a male sex offender. But have we also seen as that females are more engaged on the trafficking component? Usually they're the females that are hosting brothels or some of the trafficking rings, but that's a different issue because we're really talking about child sexual exploitation and what happens online. And as the question said, it's pretty much all male sex offenders. Good question, by the way, whoever asked that. I wish I could pronounce your name. Sure, if there's another question, I'll be happy to answer that. Okay, that's another good question. When we talk about terminology, we're looking at, let's say, before I get to your question, so when we look at the terminology, this type of crime is commonly known as child sexual exploitation, but mostly the public knows it as child pornography, because the term pornography and the term child, we put those together and there's child pornography. But really, it is not child pornography. Pornography is one thing. Pornography is two consensual adults engaging in a sexual act, either getting for profit or not for profit. That's one end. Children at that age, which I had mentioned before, these are youngest of the youngest, they can engage in pornography, as we call it. But of course, because of the media, because of the news, we call it child pornography. In some of the countries, and in fact, in the United States, a lot of times we have to go by what the law says. Unfortunately, in the United States and many other countries, the term child pornography still remains defined in the national code. So this poses a challenge because we have to call it still child pornography. But the reality, as I said in the presentation, these are child sexual abuse material, child sexual exploitation material. These are the worst of the worst crimes against children. Now, when we talk about terminology, there are two very important terminologies as it relates to the word child pornography. CSAM is child sexual abuse material, and CSAM is child sexual exploitation material. They're the same thing. It is abuse material or exploitation material. It really depends how in your country or in your laws you might refer to it as well. I've seen both of the terms. Both of the terms are okay to use. It really is the same issue, child sexual abuse material or child sexual exploitation material. We're talking about exploitation and abuse. Now, you can have exploitation in many ways. Labor, trafficking, illicit employment, all these sort of farming, fishing, etc. That's all exploitation. Abuse is more sexual abuse, physical abuse, any type of that type of physical contact abuse. At the end of the day, it's exploitation and abuse. Hello, person from ECPACT. I can't pronounce your name, and I'm not going to pronounce your name out of respect, but it's a pleasure to have you here. as I said, I'm really happy to see you here because we've worked with ECPACT in different countries to really build capacity around policy, around legislation, around awareness and education. And I said, one of the important projects that we're working is on the issue of terminology. As the previous question said, what is the difference between CSAM and CSAM? Those are some of the terminologies that we're actually defining in the Luxembourg guidelines that we're working with ECPACT. As I don't see any more questions, I wanted just to bring just another important point. One of the areas that we're trying to work in Mongolia, and as I said, we've been there 2 times already. The first time was to train the national police on how to proactively investigate child sexual exploitation. And the second time we were there actually with UNICEF to, again, bring in prosecutors and bring in law enforcement to address the issue of child sexual exploitation. Between both trainings, I can tell you it was about 10 years difference. So that was a lot of time between trainings. One of the gaps that I see that Mongolia has is that if there is a national strategy plan or a national plan of action to combat online child sexual exploitation, I haven't seen it. Not that you don't have anything in place, you may or may not have. And maybe you can find out if there's a national child protection strategy. As part of any strategy to address child exploitation, an entity or a country has to look at different criteria. And there are guidelines to look at this criteria. There's actually about 27 different areas that a country can look at. For instance, we already talked about law enforcement and capacity building. What about legislation? Does Mongolia have the proper legislation? I showed you in the presentation, Mongolia does have really good legislation. But what about enforcement? What about bringing the policymakers and really educating them on the prevalence of online child sexual exploitation? I think this is an issue that's really important, and we see this issue in many parts of the world, that the government itself, the agencies are doing everything that they can, but when it comes to policy, when it comes to regulations, when it comes to political discussions, I think that's the next step that Mongolia needs to really take. Because if you're really trying to address child exploitation, you need to have a formulated national plan of action. What does that look like? I can't really tell you what Mongolia would look like, but I can tell you that there are 27 different capabilities, from governance to NGOs, to academia, to researching. But all these different capabilities play a very important pivotal role when we're looking at capacity building. And I want to just say again, what is capacity building? It is multiple things, from having a reporting hotline, to having a reporting portal, to collecting data and statistics, to have services for the victims and services for the perpetrators, but also to develop prevention and awareness campaign. Now, I'm not sure if you know this, but last week it's celebrated worldwide, but it's the Internet Safety Day, and it's celebrated all over the world. And it's very important to address this issue because, again, we're talking about prevention measurements. And it is very important to have those prevention measurements, because if we don't develop prevention, what are the kids going to do? They're going to go online, they're going to play video games, they're going to get online and talk to some stranger that could possibly harm them. So I think focusing on the lowest hanging fruit is pivotal to address child exploitation. But as I said, I think it's important to revise or look to see if you have a national plan of action to combat child sexual exploitation. Many countries have plan of actions. plan of action to combat counterterrorism, plan of action to combat cybercrime, plan of action to combat drugs, hate crime. But when it comes to plan of action to combat child protection, it's always at the bottom of the barrel. So that's something that you could consider in looking at it. And if there's one, if it's new, it's great. If it's 3 to 4 years old, maybe it might be time to revise it. Okay, here's a question that it reads, last year when I participated as a panelist in a conference on child protection in the online environment, I felt that the common understanding of child exploitation in our country was insufficient. And to tell you the truth, I think it is a lack of awareness. It is a lack of understanding how big and large the prevalence is in Mongolia. I could go on and we can have separate discussions, and it's really pulling that data, understanding how many cases of the cyber tips are going into Mongolia, finding out what kind of cases are going on the darknet. We have to do a lot of research to identify how big the prevalence and problem of child exploitation might be in Mongolia. You may not see it, but if you scratch the surface, you're going to find a lot of the children are going online and be in this type of activities. And forget the online child sexual exploitation. Think about the teenagers. Think about the prevention measurements. All the teenagers are every day on their phones, online, playing video games. I think it is a responsibility as a society to start developing those awareness and prevention campaigns before it gets worse. If I can tell you 10 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe when the internet wasn't so available, maybe you would not understand how large was the problem. But now, with so many resources and disposals at our fingertips, I think it is very likely that you're gonna find a lot of movement, a lot of issues of child sexual exploitation in Mongolia. And I guarantee, if you talk to the police, maybe, if you're trying to find out how many cases have been reported of child exploitation, you'll be surprised. I'm sorry, there was a question in Mongolian, but it's not translated, so I can't really read it. But with technology, I'm going to go to Google Translate here. Okay, so the question reads, yeah, so peer-to-peer, okay, yeah. Peer-to-peer appear on teachers' RRT in terms of child sexual exploitation. Peer-to-peer influence is controversial among stakeholders. What do you think about this? Okay, that's a good question and a good topic. Let me do something. Can the host allow me to share my screen? I'm going to show a live demo. I'm unable to share my screen. Okay, while they're trying to set that up, hopefully we can share. Okay, there we go. Got it. Thank you. I'm gonna try to share my screen. Okay, here we go. 1 second. Okay, you'll see my screen. Of course, you know, you have Genghis Khan there. That was on our trip to Mongolia last time. I found that picture fascinating. But 1 second, I'm gonna try to show you something important here. Now, when we talk about peer-to-peer, let's 1 second. I hope you can see my screen. I'm gonna do this live. I hope you guys see my screen. Okay. Let's talk about peer-to-peer for a minute. Peer-to-peer is when computers from one computer is sharing information to another computer via a decentralized or centralized server. So for example, my name is Guillermo, and I'm going to share via an application, via 1 second. One second. Okay, thank you. So peer-to-peer is when you're trading from your communicating or sending files from one computer to another computer directly. And this is done via a centralized or decentralized servers. Most servers are decentralized. That means that the information is not held at the server. It could be held at a different servers or multiple servers. So it's a direct connection from one computer to another computer. Now, if I am in Mongolia and I want to download a movie, and I'm at a hotel, and I want to download a movie that just came out 2 days ago or 3 days ago, I'm going to go and download a client. Usually, your client can be Emu, eDonkey, Nutella. There's multiple clients. Once I download my client to my computer, I can go into it and I can hit whatever movie you want, the new Genghis Khan 2024 movie. And it goes into that client and it's going to look at different computers that have that specific file that may be pirated, that may be illegally obtained. People download music, people download child exploitation material, anything illegal, pirated, etc., that can be traded via peer-to-peer. That means computer to computer. The problem with this is that it's very hard to trace the IP address because you can have a dynamic peer-to-peer dynamic IP address, or you may have a VPN. So that means the IP address is totally secure and you can identify. Law enforcement have developed a tool, and I'm going to show you this. This is called ICAC COPS, and it's a tool that is created by law enforcement to law enforcement, but it's able to identify how many IP addresses or what IP addresses are trading known images of child sexual exploitation. So if I go up here, and again, this is live, I'm going to go here to Mongolia. And what you see here, I'm going to blow my computer, okay, you're going to see, okay, you're going to see a lot of numbers and a lot of information. But I want you to focus on this. Take a look at the first line. This is your IP address, 173.239.196.117. The networks are this: BitTorrent, Emu, Freenet, G2, etc. This is your IP company, IPXO Limited and DataCamp. These are all different IP addresses, IP companies. The location here, it says Ulaanbaatar, UB, but this is what I'm most concerned. FOI stands for files of interest. This person has 154,792 files of interest, possible suspected child sexual exploitation material. This is the last seen. This person has been on this as of 2 days ago, and it was first seen in early February. And again, if you go up here, you will pull out all this information. But again, look at all these pages. You have multiple pages, and up here, you have all the files of interest. Now, in Mongolia, the possession of child sexual abuse material is criminalized. The distribution of child sexual exploitation material is also criminalized. So these individuals are using technology, especially peer-to-peer networks, to trade the worst of the worst images. You may ask me, well, why aren't they getting arrested? Well, because the data is just so much. You saw 154,000 images, 200,000 possible images. There's no possible outcome that the police in Nepal or any police agency in the world is going to be able to triage or investigate so many cases of child sexual exploitation, possible cases. Now, because to address this, again, law enforcement has developed technology tools that are able to come through so much data and large quantities of information that it makes it easier for law enforcement to be able to narrow in or target in on the possible top 10 offenders that have most of the images. But as I said, this is a tool designed from law enforcement to law enforcement. It's not a commercial tool. It's not available. You can't download it anywhere. The only way that law enforcement could have it is that they have to be trained by law enforcement to be able to obtain that tool as well. And again, that's just on peer-to-peer networks. I'm not talking about the open internet. I'm not talking about the cyber tips. I'm just talking about peer-to-peer, computer to computer. There's an argument on how peers affect the children. Of course, my thoughts are that children are naive and children are going to learn from their friends, whether there's bad habits, whether there's good habits, but also there's curiosity. And every child is going to have curiosity. And if you're hanging out with the wrong individuals, everyone's going to be curious to open up an app, chat with someone that they should be chatting. And my thoughts are, I think it's important to discuss prevention, education, and awareness. I think at the end of the day, that's the most important approach to address child sexual exploitation. We should focus on how the children can be prevented from falling at risk. Again, develop as part of the national strategy plan, if there's one, develop or create a prevention plan. I think that would be the lowest hanging fruit. Because when it comes to changes in legislation, movements all the way up here, that's a long term. I think we should focus on the short, medium, and long term. And the short is to develop prevention and awareness. With that, I want to thank the organizers, Nomin and team, and everyone for participating. I know this is a lunar holiday and New Year. Happy New Year, by the way. But I think this is an important topic, and I'll be happy to engage in further emails, discussion. You have our website, and if we can be of any help, by all means, please count on us. You'll hear this term. it takes a village to create a village. And this is pretty much what it is. It takes a team to combat child sexual exploitation. So thank you so much, and you have a good day.